Hi, this is Holly from the Sweet Simple Things, and welcome to my channel where we make healthy and nourishing recipes the whole family will love. Make sure you hit subscribe to see all the latest recipes. Today we're making fermented cherry tomatoes with basil and garlic. They are so fun, they're fizzy inside, and fermented foods are so good for you. So I'm just going to show you what we need here. We need a glass quart jar, a fermenting glass weight, and a fermenting lid. I really love these easy fermenter lids. And then you're going to need your ingredients. I'm using fresh basil, probably about 10 leaves or so, some fresh garlic and some sea salt, cherry tomatoes obviously, and then I'm using my reverse osmosis water, but you can use filtered water as well. So here's how I do my ferments, because I have dealt with mold in the past, and when I found this new method of doing it, now they turn out perfect literally every time. So what you have to do is we're going to get the weight of everything, the water and the vegetables, not just the water, which is how some recipes do it. So to start, weigh your jar and write down that weight, because if you've ever used a food scale, sometimes they get messed up. So you want to know how much the jar itself weighs in case something happens while you're trying to do this and you need to subtract it later on. So anyway, write down the weight of the jar. Next, you can prep your basil and your garlic. I like to kind of roughly chop these, but I want to keep them pretty big. You don't want small pieces, because what we want to try to avoid are little floaters going to the top once you add the water, because floaters at the top invite mold to your ferment. Anything exposed to air will invite mold, so we don't want to do that. However, that said, that's one reason why I love these easy fermenter lids so much, because they're, if you use them correctly, very difficult to get any mold because all of the oxygen gets out. So that's awesome. But anyway, roughly chop your basil so that it's not too small. Do the same with the garlic. I just take my knife, as you can see here, and just give it a few large whacks or whatever, just to kind of have big pieces that I can layer with the tomatoes and the basil. So anyway, while I finish that up, back to why I do this method the way that I do it. It's just much more precise. You can totally ferment by just making a salt brine based only on the water. Lots of people do it that way, but it is a little bit less precise, because at the end of the day, your vegetables are also mostly water, and that water content does count when it comes to fermenting. So it's just a little more accurate to also include that in the math when you're trying to calculate your brine percentage. Okay, so we've got our ingredients ready to go. Go ahead and do the first layer of tomatoes. I'm just going to probably fill this about 1/4 of the way full. And then I'll put some garlic and some basil on top. Make sure that your scale is tracking these things accurately. Be careful not to bump the 0 button or turn it off or anything like that. Okay, another layer of tomatoes. And some more garlic and basil. Now we're just going to repeat these layers until we get pretty close to the top, remembering that we have a fermentation weight we have to fit, and we kind of want to fill this jar perfectly so that with the weight it goes right up to the lid, because we don't want a lot of head space. The more head space, the more oxygen, the more your ferment is at risk for mold. Okay, so also as I'm layering this, I want my tomatoes to be my last layer, because I want to try to prevent basil or garlic from floating. Have your fermentation weight ready, but it's not quite time to put it in yet. We are going to add the water. So as you can see, we're at 455 grams of just the vegetables, but now we're adding the water. So slowly pour your filtered filtered water over the vegetables. I'm using just my reverse osmosis. I have a reverse osmosis filter that also remineralizes, so it adds back those essential minerals, and I love it. But yeah, so fill up your jar with that filtered water, and then make a note of the total weight of the water and the vegetables, 848 grams. Remember, when you're pouring the water, remember you still have to fit that fermentation weight, so don't go all the way to the top, because otherwise you're going to overflow it when you put that in. Okay, now we're going to do our calculation to get a 2.5% brine. So 847 times 0.025, that would be 2.5%. And we'll do our math here to figure that out. You just type it right in, and that's how you do it if it's been a while since you've worked with percentages. No judgment here. So anyway, I get just over 21 grams. Now, just round to the nearest gram is fine. So I'm going to use 21 grams of salt. Sea salt is what I'm using here. You can also use pink salt. You want to avoid salt that has iodine added. Anyway, so I recommend not doing what I'm doing here. So I have a big bowl of salt that I'm just going to try to pour slowly. That's a little bit risky. Salt adds up fast. I highly recommend that you measure out the exact amount in a separate container and then just pour it in. But anyway, here I go. I get pretty close. I do think I end up over by a gram. Yep. So add your salt, then get your weight in there very carefully, because that water is going to want to push up, and then screw a lid on it. I also recommend, so I'm just putting my fermentation lid on right now, but you know, it leaks a little bit, so I highly recommend just using a regular lid for this part, but this is just what I had out, and I just decided I was going to work with it. So screw on the lid, and now we're going to gently flip this jar and swirl it back and forth to get the salt dissolved. You do not need to vigorously shake this, so you can see how a little bit of my water leaked out there. That's why I'm saying a better lid, a more waterproof lid would be better for this part. You do not have to shake. You do not need warm water. The salt will dissolve with gentle flipping and agitation. It just needs some patience, okay? So it might take about 2 minutes of doing this to get all the salt dissolved, but I highly recommend doing it gently. One, because we're trying to avoid those floaters, which I've already talked about a few times. And two, especially because my lid isn't like super waterproof. You just don't want to go too crazy, but just do it gently and it will dissolve. Next, another nice thing about these lids is they have a little date slider like that. So I'm going to move it to that day's date, and I can't read it in my video, and I'm narrating this later on. I don't remember what number it was, but I put it on the day's date, and then that way you can just keep track. I let mine ferment for 5 days. 5 to 7 days is typically the right amount of time. And then I always like to inspect it a little bit. As you can see, there's some tiny little floaters, but they look good. No mold. All the oxygen got out. And another way you can tell with those easy fermenter lids is if the water starts pushing out through the valve and you have a little puddle of water on the lid in a day or so. I mean, that's a good sign to me that pretty much all the oxygen is out. So that's great. We'll go ahead and give these a try. The fermented tomatoes get fuzzy on the inside. Maybe fuzzy isn't the word you want to hear with fermenting. It gets fizzy on the inside, and they're really fun. They're effervescent and just like really refreshing and super fun to eat. These are one of my favorite ferments to make because they're just so easy and they're quick. Like I said, 5 to 7 days, and they're really tasty. So I think you guys are going to love this. I highly recommend eating them within probably 5 days though, because they are so porous and they're not as hard as some other vegetables. I just don't feel like they last quite as long. I mean, they'll be safe to eat longer, so you can eat them longer safely, but like to keep the fizziness, you want to eat those within probably like 3 to 5 days for the best results. So I hope you guys love this. Give it a try.